Well, thank you, Ron, and thank you, Christine. And thank you for coming, and I hope you all found somewhere to park. I wish the library had its own parking place, but apparently the stuff downstairs does not belong to the library. Well, I'm delighted to introduce to you today one of my colleague Mel Ziegler's latest stellar appointments to Vanderbilt's art department, Vesna Pavlovic. I've asked her to talk about her own creative work in the context of contemporary reflection on the limits and possibilities of photography. Professor Pavlovic is a native of Serbia. She graduated in camera studies from the Academy of Drama Arts in Belgrade, and she received her Master of Fine Arts degree, her MFA, from Columbia in 2007. But even before this last degree, she'd become, I would say, an internationally celebrated photographer and a rising star. She's exhibited widely, including solo shows at the Museum of History in Yugoslavia in Belgrade, the Crocker Art Museum in Sacramento. She's been featured in group exhibitions in museums and galleries right around the world in Belgrade, Vienna, St. Petersburg, Vilnius, Dunkirk, Warsaw, Barcelona, Helsinki, London, and Cambridge. Professor Pavlovic was the award winner at the 40th October Salon in Belgrade for her photographic series, which I translate as Warm Welcome in the Belgrade Hyatt Hotel. Herzliche Willkommen, yeah. And she's the recipient of numerous grants, including a GAP grant for artists from the Artist Trust in Seattle in 2008, which I think she pretty much had to interrupt to come here. In the 90s in Belgrade, she worked closely with the pacifist feminist group Women in Black, who, I might remind you, were active here in Nashville in the run-up to the Iraq War. I wish she'd been here to photograph them. And she worked for years as a photojournalist, photo correspondent for the German magazine Die Zeit. Her work is represented in many major public and private collections. Her publications include Office Taste, which was co-authored with Casey Smith, and An Idyll on the Beach. So what kind of work does she do? Her projects could be described as collaborative anthropological studies, analyzing different cultures and their visual representations. She deals with issues of taste, desire, expectation, and the nitty-gritty of performance in different contexts. Her work explores what's going on in photographic representation, revealing many layers that constitute the images that we look at. And she's especially interested in the shifting boundaries of contemporary public and private space. And I should add, we share an interest in landscape and in sculpture gardens. Professor Pavlovic is a dynamic and galvanizing presence here at Vanderbilt, a wonderful ambassador for the creative arts. She also has a delightful and, I would say, playful take on the world, which is, I think, reflected in some of the titles of her exhibitions and projects, like Zombie Town, Sadness, The Origin of the World, History Started Playing with My Life, Stirring, Streaming, Dreaming, Situated Self, Confused, Compassionate, Conflictual, and if I recall it rightly, one of them was called Where Have All the Funny Men Gone? Please welcome Professor Vesna Pavlovic, whose talk today is entitled Photography's Expanded Field.
Well, I would like to thank Nashville Public Library and Professor David Wood, a good friend of the Vanderbilt University, for inviting me to give this presentation and talk about my work. Thank you all for coming today, regardless of parking. So when asked to speak about your own work, one can either present a chronological survey of one's own artistic production, or decide to go slightly alternative ways and define and try alternative route to define what it is in the artistic medium that is the problem, what it has been that has driven my art production for a period of years. While talking about my own work, I will also present a selection of ideas and practices which have been an influence to my work. I have borrowed George Baker's essay entitled from his essay on photography's expanded field from 2005 to address a few photographic practices and works which contest the traditional notions of the photographic medium, something that I am, as an artist, very much interested in. So I hope that this combination of practices, some words from George Baker, and images that you will be seeing here will raise some of the interesting questions for our conversations afterwards. Everywhere one looks today in the world of contemporary art, the photographic object seems to be an object in crisis, or at least in severe transformation. In describing the importance of the recognition of the photographic medium in the 70s, George Baker mentions that postmodernism could almost be described as a photographic event, as a series of artistic practices reorganized around the parameters of photography, taken as what Rosalind Krauss has recently called a theoretical object. The submission of artistic objects to photography's logic of the copy, the recalcitrance to normative conceptions of authorships and style, and its embeddedness within mass cultural formations, its stubborn referentiality, and consequent puncturing of aesthetic autonomy. So, what is the photographic event? In this slide, we see Dan Graham's famous piece. Great, the lights can go down a little bit. Thank you. Famous piece, Homes for America. His publication of one of the earliest works in the layout and the form of a magazine article marks one of the most important moments of the conceptual art. The quest for the empirical, making art every day, wherever you are, is turned into the forms of distribution and representation. Graham states that information on art is always mediated through mass cultural forms of dissemination. Dan Graham started this project in 1965 while recording the tract housing developments in New Jersey. Using his Instamatic camera, he depicts rows of houses with a simple perspective and describes them as architectural alignments, photographs, an article, and minimal art. Going against the conventions of the medium, Graham has further produced objects and architectural models, pavilions, and other interactive and reflective environments. In the social and artistic climate of the 60s, where abstract expressionism and minimalism have been prevailing as dominant practices and positions, Robert Smithson produced his work, Hotel Palenque in 1969. A desire to identify art with all aspects of life and dislocated from the gallery settings enabled a series of artistic practices to evolve as an opposition to then prevailing practices. Robert Smithson's and Nancy Holt's salons in New York City were the gathering places where slide projections had a great role of creating a dialogue among the artists and the audiences. In 1972, Robert Smithson has presented the Hotel Palenque lecture, taken in 1996, of a deteriorating hotel in Oaxaca, Mexico, to a group of students at the University of Utah. It is at once a travelogue, a performance activity, and a documentation. Using words and images, Smithson describes hotels' sprawling, haphazard accumulation of structures in their various states of disuse and decline. Smithson takes on this hotel as an example of de-architecturization, an entropy made visible, and a living monument to the irresistible forces that bring each living thing to disappearance. My projects develop as anthropological studies analyzing different cultures and their visual representations through a particular phenomena. I'm interested in the experience of history and the changes it brings to society and culture. In this work, a series of color photographs, out of which you can see just this one on Hotel Hyatt Belgrade, I was interested in this work produced during the American and NATO bombing campaign on Serbia, and it's titled Herzlich Willkommen im Hotel Hyatt, Belgrade, April 1999, bearing that title simply because it was produced as a photojournalistic record for the Die Zeit magazine. I was on a photojournalistic assignment for the magazine Die Zeit. In a documentary sense, those photographs captured the leisurely activities of Serbian nouveau riche and the foreign media representatives who were residing at the hotel during that time. In a war ran entirely as a video game with a very precise action, Hotel Hyatt clearly was not a target. On another hand, those photographs were asking a question of where the real event was taking place. Was it in the front line or what we lived through on our daily lives? In the On Normality exhibition and catalog of the Serbian art of the 90s, Belgrade art historian Branislav Dimitrijevic states that Hyatt photographs took on an ironic approach on what we consider normality in Belgrade during those times. They brought an equally relevant truth about the war. They were not the other side of the reality. They were the reality itself. Such an event becomes visualized as a quarantine strategy in which attitude becomes cynicism rather than empathy towards the war. The greatest allies of Serbia during this quarantine strategy were the representatives of foreign media themselves and the relativism of the developed world. After the Hyatt series, I have produced a body of work titled Hotels. Those are the color prints, all in the sizes of 55 to 75 centimeters and very formally framed. Inspired by the ethnologist Marc Augé's Non-Places Introduction to an Anthropology of Supermodernity, he discusses the transitory spaces, such as hotels and airports, as spaces in which we feel ourselves as spectators without paying too much attention to the spectacle. A lot of my work is based on careful and documentary observation of the culture and the history that shapes our living experiences. For the hotels series, I have visited more than 30 hotels in Serbia and Montenegro, all built in the 70s, which are found in an uncertain future of transition. Those hotel spaces were the representatives of local socialist modernism and built during the golden age of Yugoslav socialism. Contrary to the belief that the good times would last forever, Christopher Phillips, curator and writer of the ICP New York, wrote an accompanying essay for the exhibition in 2002. Nothing ages more quickly than yesterday's visions of tomorrow. In spending nights and days in those spaces, I was interested in evoking the psychology of the times rather than architecture of the buildings. People are never present in those photographs. Yet their traces and leftovers are. Hotel photographs depict different interiors, details of the furniture, and the style of the time. The impossible lighting systems, utopian ideas of the space, and enclosed red atmosphere at the lounges serving political elites. Small exhibitions of those photographs were, after the series was over, turned back to the hotel rooms and sort of closed in to several rooms. And they provided this temporary visual experience for the guests themselves. So they were both presented in gallery sites and hotel rooms afterwards. In his essay, while describing the photography's expanded field of operation, George Baker discusses the medium's hesitation between motion and stasis, which, in his words, brings an interesting possibility of the medium. For it seems that while the medium of photography has been thoroughly transformed today, and while the object forms of traditional photography are no longer in evidence in much advanced artistic practice, something like a photographic effect still remains, survives, perhaps in a new, altered form. We may think of those altered forms while we remember Vita Conchi's performances, poems, and photographs. Already an established poet, Aconci did his first visual artworks by combining photographs with text to document task-oriented activities that he performed specifically for the lens. A pioneer of conceptual, video, and performance art, Aconci went between the assumed boundaries between the public and private space, audiences and performers, while positioning his own body as the simultaneous subject and the object of his work. In the wave photographs, his performance is equally important as the traces of his body that he leaves afterwards, therefore connected to the idea of the photographic trace. In describing postmodern photography practices, George Baker uses the terms not narrative and not stasis, referring to the photographic work suspended between the conditions of being neither narrative nor fully static. This is to paraphrase Krauss. The not narrative is, according to the logic of a certain kind of expansion, just another way of expressing the term stasis, and the non-stasis is simply narrative. Freezing the cinematic movement into still images to be projected over long delays, like in the work of James Coleman, or presented as still photographs, like in film stills of Cindy Sherman, Baker is discussing the use of photograph as a self-conscious fragment of a larger field, what he calls the non-stasis, for works which we could not call photographs. Through a set of staged performances in New York City in the 1980s, Cindy Sherman has created her seminal series Untitled Film Stills. The ambiances are ambiguous, but we associate them with different social settings. Those photographs are clearly staged. When we look at them, we don't know the narrative, but we know that something is going on. The images are fragments, segmented temporalities. Their sense of narrative, as Douglas Crimps writes, is one of its simultaneous presence and absence. The work of Sherman, Sherry Levine, Barbara Kruger, Richard Prince, James Welling, John Baldessari, and other authors challenged the photographer's claims to originality, showing those claims for the fiction that they are, showing photography always is the representation, always a ready scene, engaging in provocative experimentation of the medium. Slides are the medium of James Coleman's work. Slide piece is one of his early experiments. A single image here functions as a piece. It goes beyond the simple representation, and it is being supported by a voiceover with a soundtrack added to it. It is also a projection rather than a print. Coleman considers a carousel move of the projector both a layering device as well as a loop, stressing the importance of its circular motion to describe a narrative. What we are looking right now is a selection of images from my Show Homes series. Show Homes, produced in 2006 and 2007, present images of model houses shot in various locations in the United States. The important note here is that both the black and white images that you are looking at on the screen right now are presented as slide transparencies within the installation and black and white prints together. Resembling film sets, the series extends themes prevalent in my earlier work, which include audience and performance, and issues of taste set in different anthropological contexts. The elaborate homes are meticulously arranged for prospective buyers, revealing shifting boundaries between the private and public space in the United States. Those large homes staged for sale are so vast and artificially put together that any sense of intimacy is lost. It is a place to live, yet it is unlivable. It is presented as a private home, yet it is a public display. Trying to remove any object would deeply ruin a sense of staged order. Within the installation display desire, the prints simultaneously function as images of display and display of images. Strange details of American home are exposed through the language of cinema and mechanism of projection. The projection of black and white transparencies onto semi-transparent plexiglass screen suggests the plastic quality of the interiors, and within the overlapping projection spaces, the images transform, exploring possible representation of the photographic medium itself. The continuous loop of black and white interiors is captured and reflected through the set of plexiglass screens, suggesting the plasticity of the interiors and the architectural space created by the projection. The audience is caught in between the screens and projected spaces, captured on the screens functioning as photographic emulsion. This installation has marked a solid departure in my investigation of the medium of photography and its relation to the display structures, projected images, and spatial concerns in photography. Here you see another example of the work that you'll see both as images and installation of the collection Collectia, which was a slide projection in Center for Contemporary Art in Dunkirk in France in 2008. The work collection Collectia depicted and looked into two important art collections, the Chase Manhattan Art Collection in New York and the Palace of Federation in Belgrade, Serbia. The Chase Manhattan, both collections are important to the idea of the post-Second World War Cold War culture. Both were established with the idea to beautify the working environment, but also establish system of power in two different social, political, and economic systems. Images of art found in those photographs discuss the different ideas of change. On one side, there was David Rockefeller gathering a collection of the most significant American artists of the time to display the modern corporate office. And on the other, there was the President Tito, who decorated the vast governmental building with the paintings of Yugoslav anti-fascist struggle of the World War II. After many attempts to gain permission to photograph inside the Chase Manhattan building in downtown Manhattan, in itself a famous architectural monument, I found out that the art collection has shifted to different locations, following the logic of capitalism and technology of rapid change. Whereas the rooms and collections of former Yugoslav republics stayed intact, facing an unknown future concession between the former republics. The space of the Palace of Federation looked like a museum of history of the former Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Like Hotel Sirius that you've seen previously, this project touched on the hovering ideas of failure of progressive modernism, which was supposed to become a universal language, which transcended any ideological boundaries. In the last part of my presentation, I would like to show a few images of the ongoing body of work, which I have started since my arrival to Nashville and Vanderbilt last year. It is titled The Search for Landscapes. This project develops around a group of found vintage slides, which depict one family's travels around the world in 1960s. If there were a call for the community to look through the archives of travel slides and documents, what would we find, and where did we go, and what did we see? Acquired last summer, the boxes of slides were a bastard material with not enough scientific data for any study-use material, yet beautiful visual registries of the world captured through the camera lens in the 1960s. While looking into the materiality and the physicality of these objects, I'm also exploring the history of travel, visual tourism, and the relationship we have to the culture and history of particular tourist sites. The images I make are, among others, camera-less photographs, direct scans of objects evoking the sentimentality and obsolescence of the projection technologies. In his book, Traveling Light, Peter Osborne talks about the genealogy of tourism and the importance of photography to the promotion and expression of the tourist experience. The word tourist has been described by Osborne and the others as a traveler who seeks pleasure in viewing picturesque landscapes. In their search for landscapes and visual experiences, tourists are at once framing and being framed. The tourist gaze is constructed, experienced, and maintained by visual images which remain typically photographic. In this ongoing project, which will be first seen and presented at Soil Art Gallery in Seattle next month, I am interested in ways that the development of the medium of photography and the viewing devices helped shape our visual perception and how it relates to travel. Comparing the ideas of travel and the transformation of landscape through various sites may offer many different cultural perspectives of travel. We can understand the tourist photography as a performed activity. The interaction between the tourist, the gaze, and the place is revealing of our desires to own the place, to engage and understand the culture. Often social contracts of our destinations dictate what we expect from our travels. Photographs provide visual guides to the right settings, moves, and the gestures of performance. Like religion, tourism, and photography transform the world into a dramatic text, but a text illuminated, suffused with enhanced perception, and with the desire for happiness. The plane of the photographic image offers more than it is immediately evident. In her essay, Too Much, The Grand Canyons, Lucy Lippard suggests the idea of owning the landscape but subjecting it to representation. Film grain captures details revealing of our aspirations, histories, and the unexpected. In this sense, various sites frequented by tourists offer rich potential for cultural interrogation. Landscape is here considered a stage and a site for performance. The world of the tourist is over there, suggests Peter Osborne, in the past present, in the exotic ordinary. The Peace Markers offers us the visualization of one of the three elements which make for the tourist attraction: the site, the marker, and the tourist. In Family Scene Sightseeing, Performativity of Tourist Photography, Jonas Larsson describes tourists as not only being spectators, they're also actors in shows directed by themselves and or the tourist industry. In addition to looking at places, tourists enact them corporeally. They step into the landscape picture and engage bodily, sensuously, and expressively with their materiality. Finally, this project will address some of the tourist attractions and locations in Nashville, in addition to the appropriated and found imagery. The camera lens will be turned to the things we like to see, but also to the things that we often forget to look at. To end this presentation, I have chosen John Baldessari's work from the late 1960s, his text painting, Terms Most Useful in Describing Creative Works of Art. Being faced with internal production crisis resulting to physically ruining some of his unsold works, the artist wondered of ways to reach his audiences, offering us his trust in words with a slight irony, yet believed that we have to find ways to engage. For me, this means a continuous exploration of the medium of photography, its properties, and its language. The expanded field of photography in Baker's words and all its spatial qualities and endless possibilities. Thank you.
Well, there's so many questions I'd like to ask, but I think I'd like to start off just asking you, thinking back to those hotel photographs from Belgrade, just to say something about the transition or the change in the last, say, 10 years from being in Belgrade under war conditions and being in the United States, well, I guess under war conditions too, but slightly different sense. But I'm interested, photographically, what sort of opportunities and challenges there are here compared to what was there. I mean, you were looking at hotels, these sort of empty transitional spaces there, and now you're looking at travel and landscapes. But the historical context and the personal context must be very, very different. Could you say something about what's changed for you?
Well, I think that the ideas of change are sort of constant, and you sort of visually face them as you continue to produce your own work. For me, even in the beginning of 2000 and in the late 90s, when the country was going through these horrible wars and separations, it was sort of the way to produce work was the answer to sort of engaging with the politics and engaging with the everyday life. My work with women in black and sort of photographing the street protests and just being a friend and being there to record these changes has been an important aspect of my work. And I think, especially with hotels, I mean, those are beautiful objects, beautiful spaces that are visually compelling, and there's about 30 photographs in this series, and they have been sort of kept intact, which brings this sort of a sad feeling of like in a similar way to the Palace of Federation photographs, there is a similar sort of stagnation, as if nothing ever changes, something that's that could be partially addressed through the ongoing project with Search for Landscapes and looking into the obsolete technologies. It's something that all of us have recorded endlessly and presented endlessly, and now it's all in some boxes, and it still stays this beautiful visual material, yet waiting to be unpacked, almost like some sort of a library waiting to be unpacked. So I think that there is a little bit of sadness to that sort of an idea of non-changing and then facing a very rapid change of things here in the United States and sort of recording those, or maybe sort of going back and forth between the past and the present and finding what sort of a friction is possible to find within that past and present. And I think that within this project, specifically because the photographs that you have seen are appropriated and sort of direct scan made photographs, so there is nothing there that I have photographed. Everything is sort of taken, and I've worked with it. But in a way, that has been a historical material. So in the development of this project, I think it will be interesting to see what sort of present moment of the idea of tourism and travel means for the city, means for us personally, and how those could be looked together. So pretty much it's that friction that happens between the past and the present where I sort of find a possibility for that visual expression.
So let me ask you a question about what I would call like conceptual photography. Because a lot of, certainly a lot of the works you were showing represent a sort of challenge both for the photographer and for the spectator, in the sense that I think we have a kind of prejudice or assumption that a photograph is, of something, is like a window, and you see the photograph, and well, that sort of shows you what it's a photograph of. But if you look at some of your, let's say, the travel landscape travel sequence, you've got tourist photographs, and if you exhibit these, how do you get the people who are looking at these photographs to see them in the way that you want them to see them? Or that's assuming there is a way you want them to see them, but you don't just want them to see them as, well, two people in a square or a caravan against the mountains. I mean, how do you convey that there's something more going on in this conceived of as art, let's say, than just a photograph.
As an experience.
Yeah.
There's a few ways I sort of like to work within, and one of which is I like to write about the work that I do, and that piece of writing, and you could see, you could say so as I've read this talk rather than just talked about the work. That I've sort of spent time writing it about it. That there is a way to reach audiences in a way to engage the audiences by offering a different interpretation of the ideas you work with. For me, it has been writing, and it has been the installation ideas. I think that there is ways of engaging with the audiences while presenting juxtapositions within the exhibition space, which then try to create some relations. It's almost similar like within the photographic image. Once you start composing your image, you play along with the elements that you're photographing, and you sort of, and those elements in effect tell about your photograph, and those elements give the meaning of the photograph that you create. So in a similar way, when you enter the exhibition space, there is the way of exhibiting photographs, prints, projected images, and once again, I'm interested in these numerous ways of expanding the photographic medium and what it is and how it is today that we can find ways to address photography as a medium through many different levels. So I think that is the way for us to lead our audiences and engage our audiences as trying to create the meanings within the exhibition spaces. So in ways, the images and the contrasts that are created within the exhibition space could lead to certain meanings created by the photographs presented.
I'll just ask you one more question, then we'll open this to the audience. But I was thinking about that Cindy Sherman image that you had of I think that was the woman against the building.
Cityscape.
Cityscape. And you talked about an implicit narrative, or the sense that there's something going on there that, well, we don't know what it is.
But we know that it is going on.
But there's something going on. This raises, for me, the question, especially given your title of what, photography in an expanded
field.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd forgotten the title, actually. About whether if that expanded field starts to include things like video and film, what's going on when you actually fill in the rest of the narrative? I mean, does photography have an advantage in producing an image, a static image, where you don't know what happened or what will happen, compared to a film where you can actually show what happens? I mean, is photography at an advantage, still photography, or at a disadvantage when it comes to this relationship between presence and absence?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it has, I think it obviously, it's the thesis of this essay and also the thesis of my talk is that it has the advantage, and that it actually has the ability to offer that narrative, especially in that case of the seminal film stills, where it functions both as a presence and the absence, and it's created as a film still to suggest the motion, whereas in photographs, especially when you start working with slides that have their own motion, the circular motion of the tray that I'm interested in, and finding ways to actually create motion by the succession of the carousel movement, then you expand that field, and then you expand the possibility of creating a narrative through using still images, while using still images. So in a way, in Display Desire installation, which sort of shows the model homes, you have the succession of these slides, black and white images, taken from both slide projectors simultaneously. And so while those projections are creating the architecture of space where you're at, you are also moving through that space and looking into the movement of images while they are still the stills. They're all they maintain their stasis, as Baker suggests. So they maintain, and then there is the idea of the narrative that happens there anytime we pull that image out of any film or play with the ideas with film stills, we have taken that film still out of its own narrative, but once taken, once absent from its narrative, it creates a new narrative. It creates its own presence in a different context.
Well, you know, it's interesting. You say it creates these things, and I'm thinking that maybe the power of photography is not that it does these things, but that the spectator is forced to or invited to imagine things. I'm thinking about this supposed advantage of radio compared to television, or black and white photography compared to color photography. That in each case, the thing that's missing, actually encourages the listener or the audience or the viewer to do something, to make something of this material. That, whereas the movie, the Technicolor movie, basically just takes you on a ride.
With the power of that sort of visual experience of Technicolor. Yeah, I mean, it's like I have a little to add to that. It almost seems like a comment on your part that it's important to, we can look into photographs as both little transparencies that we can take as physical objects. We can look at them as prints on the wall. We can look at them as projections, and that is something that I'm interested in. I'm interested in sort of creating environments, like photographic environments, that one can go through and experience what is being projected, seen, or discussed as a problem. So it's always that, and ultimately it's on the artist to find ways of reaching out and presenting the work in best possible way, and sort of engaging the people to understand what is being presented.
Okay, well let's see what questions we have from the audience here. Yes, this gentleman here.
Several keywords kind of pop up over and over again, like history, history, anthropology, documentary, and so on. I'm a film documentarian about Tennessee State Penitentiary, and we have 90 hours of filming and a lot of B footage, in addition to a lot of stills that we've taken both at Tennessee State Penitentiary and at Brushy Mountain Prison, which is, both of these are closed. So what we see now at the Tennessee State Penitentiary are ruins. Recording a history of that place is an important thing to me. So the film documentary, which I'm working on, along with the written book, is part of that story. And it seems to me that we're sitting maybe on a gold mine of photography, as well as clips from film that are here, and this is not so much a question as just giving you something to respond to.
Well, it seems to me that your project is fascinating in ways how it can go any way you would like to take it, in a way. As if there is the visual imagery there that's historical, and through looking into the details of these images, one can sort of address probably several issues about the state of things happening back then, or how they're treated now, and also in terms of visual material, those could be stills or taken off from the films. Along with the text that you're probably have about it. So it's almost like a lot of the art projects in contemporary art today function that way. They have multiple avenues they go to, and sometimes it's hard to pinpoint, like, this is the sculpture or this is the film, or it's all that, and it can sort of offer a different aspect of things through its different representation.
Okay, thank you. Other question? Yes, the lady at the front here, and then another lady at the back, further back.
I'm wondering what you're doing with digital photography, since this seems to be a whole new ballgame.
What are you doing with digital photography?
Well, I'm using it. Like while still photographing on film, I do the digital output, scanning and printing and mounting. So, I mean, presenting work and outputting work for exhibitions digitally. So I hardly ever like sit in the lab to print the work myself. I just print it in the like photographic labs that are digital, heavily digital these days. So I also, while I think that analog medium in photography is important to maintain, I'm just very much embracing the digital technologies, but at this point more for the output rather than image taking.
Lady over there, just behind you.
Vesna, that was wonderful. Thank you
you.
so much. I wonder how you feel about the assessment of your work as ironic. Do you agree or disagree?
I disagree, but if we take that irony as a creative element, then I agree. I would say, like in one can tell that the photographs of the hotels are slightly ironic, and there is the ironic approach to them. I think that they're also very beautiful spaces, and then transformed into photographs. So as much as I'm being critical in work and overtly political at points, I'm also very much compassionate about the era I've lived in or lived through, or the things that I'm facing here, and but almost like through all the aspects that I work with, I'm very much compassionate about the things that I work with and about. So, yeah, creative.
So people on the other side of the hall are also allowed to ask questions. We have a cluster over there, but
I have an observation there. Hello, Vesna.
Hello.
No, I find it interesting you were talking about engaging the person in the photograph, and especially the hotels and the conference rooms. I was thinking, not only is it a visual thing, it can be a historical thing. The texture of a chair, the texture of a wall, something that brings back a history, a smell, a sight, a person that you engaged with in your past, and it engages you not only visually, but other senses as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for bringing that comment up. I think it is it's really important for me, like that sort of the surface of the photographic image. As, for example, we've seen the Hotel Palenque, and we've seen the hotel in Mexico. We've seen the patina of the decaying hotel. So in a similar ways, there are details in images of hotels, or the Palace of Federation, or the Chase Manhattan, or even within, especially within the Search for Landscapes project, where you have that texture of the image that's being represented as both the photograph or the projection. So I am very much interested in that point that you're bringing, the surface of the photographic image, the texture, its physicality, both as an object and the photographic print.
okay, I'm sorry.
I'm curious about your response on digital photography. And you indicated that you're printing, but not so much taking photographs digitally. Could you explain why not, if you plan to in the future, or what your feelings are about that?
Yeah, it's very simple. I think that the camera that I would use is way too expensive at this point for me, so I'm just not looking at it. And in a way, I still have the cameras, the lens of the equipment that I have been using, so I continue to use it. And I think there is some sort of a sense of enjoyment while taking images on film and just keeping the negatives, because once again, they are that one layer of representation out of which you can print. We could obviously think about the file as being another representation as well, but in a way something that's very tangible, something that's in your hand, like a slide or a transparency, is what I like and still continue to do. There was one question.
There's a lady back over here.
What is your relationship to your audience? In other words, how do you reach them, and why?
Why? Well, like in the same way how I'm enjoying now this conversation with you, I like to present work. I like to bring issues. I like to discuss issues. I like to bring problems to the table. I like to point. As photographers, we are sort of observant of the life around us and the society. And simply like with the Search for Landscape project, while I'm looking into the history of travel, I'm also interested in in Nashville as a contemporary tourist town. So it's something that I want to point attention to. So I believe that in art for social change, as blunt as it seems, but I do think that it's important to address issues and discuss problems, because art has that ability to bring change through its visual impact. So I think that visual impact is something that's sort of helpful in art's hands, in artists' hands.
It seems that galleries are the least place you want to present your work.
Yeah, well, I go both ways. In galleries and outside of the gallery space, through text, books, other forms of. I think it's like, as artists, we are participants in the gallery system, and this is that is the place where we show and work, and we're valued for showing that work. So as well as museums. So I think it's important to sort of be part of both experiences. So and be able to reach different audiences through those experiences. So I'm very much open to being part of a non-governmental project and exhibition space, as well as a museum space or university setting. I think that is all like sort of leads all into your own artistic production, and it leads on, it's one thing that is about your work, and where you decide to sort of show it and how.
There's a lady in the back of it. There's a mic.
Well, first, I think your talk was wonderful. Very a lot of clarity, and I'm interested in knowing what, as a teacher at the university and with young students, what emphasis do you give in teaching young sort of potential photographers or artists? Are you, eliminating digital photography from this? Are they developing? What is your emphasis? I'm curious.
Well, so my emphasis is on ideas predominantly, but we do teach very basic introduction to black and white photography and the so-called Photo 1 class, which has been really an enjoyment for me to get back into since working with color a lot of the times. It has been this great opportunity for me to sort of present the basics of the photographic medium and the magical process of creating an image, while sort of talking about some conceptual underpinnings about photography and its impact in society, and through different lectures or presentations of other artists' works. So, and in addition to that, I work with also we teach digital photography, and as finding it very important to address all the aspects of photography today. So I also teach within the liberal arts setting. It's a college of liberal arts, so I get students which come from all over the place, and I tend not to know which majors they are, and I tend not to really deal with that. So simply they all come equally to engage with the medium, and so far I've really had great groups and of students and responses to it. Thank you.
This is in no way a philosophical question, but I noticed some of the slides are identified as hand-tinted hand-colored slides. How in the world do you go about this technique of hand-coloring a slide?
I think that what you might have seen were the handmade color photographs. So
some of the earlier ones, and they said hand-colored.
Handmade, yeah. So those are some.
I thought they said hand-color.
No, I don't hand color. but I do sometimes would make things in the lab before the digital labs were producing actually in those digital outputs. So I sort of, I'm more within the documentary tradition in photography where I just really present what's out there and then as a print. I rarely change anything in the photograph or the setting of the work, that I just photograph what I see. So in which way sort of I really do have that cinematic sort of upbringing and the very documentary influences behind my work, like of Robert Frank or Walker Evans, like very straight black and white photography, and a very sort of documentary observation.
Any more? This is perhaps a time for her friends to ask the difficult question that
That they've always
only
wanted.
Your friends can ask. No, I think we should thank her for a wonderful